Hello, First Baptist Church. This is Judson Carino here. Wanted to be able to try a little something different over here, trying to do a video again for our midweek thing. There's going to be no editing on this video, so I'm not going to have the words from the scripture on the video or any of those other various things. I just wanted you to be aware of that right now. So grab your Bible and open it up to the book of Genesis chapter 33. Genesis chapter 38. Almost said 33 there. Genesis chapter 38 is where we are going to be today. This is one crazy story in the Old Testament. And there's a lot of times people ask me, like, why is this story in the Bible? And I kind of want to be able to answer that question of why this story is in the Bible. On modern ears, this story sounds just bonkers. It is a story of Judah and Tamar. The reason why I want to talk about this here today is, and I want to talk about it briefly over here today, is we're not going to talk about it on Sunday mornings. We're going through the story of Joseph, and next Sunday we're going to be jumping back into Joseph again over here. But this is the next chapter. Last Sunday we were on Genesis chapter 37. Next Sunday we're going to be on Genesis chapter 39. We're just jumping over this chapter here, and this is going to be kind of my explanation of this. Judah and Tamar is a story that's got, I'm just going to tell you right now, it's got a lot of sex in it. The reason why people like look at the story and there's like, oh my goodness, I mean, there's just kind of descriptions of people, you know, it's kind of, this person was with this person, this person was this person, this person was this person, and then there's someone who is acting like a prostitute, and then later on that person is called righteous, and there's a whole bunch of ways to be able to say, like, what in the world is going on over here. So it is good for us to be able to kind of just be able to know what is God's word wanting to be able to tell us with this story here. And this is not going to be a story where there is going to be an action done in the story and we are to take that home and repeat that action in our lives. We just need to make sure that we're comfortable with that and we know that, because that's just not the nature of the story. So that is that, and that's okay. That's fine and everything. And also, by the way, I have a very new setup I'm trying to do over here for the videos, and we'll see if this is just insane or not. Anyways, the reason why Judah and Tamar are in your Bible, the reason why Genesis 38, I believe, is in your Bible, is because of the book of Genesis. It is not because of the Joseph story. See, from here on out for the rest of the book of Genesis, it's going to be about Joseph the hero. And Joseph is this hero amongst many, many different brothers. There are 12 sons of Israel / Jacob, and Joseph is the one son that's going to be kind of the hero of all these various stories. And we're going to talk about him on Sunday and various things. And you would think that at the end of the story of Genesis, when God is talking about who the special, who the special child is going to be beyond after everyone passes away, that everyone will remember, God says it is not going to be Joseph's descendants that will run the nation of Israel. And it is a shocking acknowledgement that happens in Scripture. You see, I kind of got ahead of myself over there. In Genesis chapter 3, Garden of Eden, and man and women are there. There's a serpent, take the fruit. Afterwards, God comes in, judges the serpent, judges both man and women. But while doing that, he also tells them, from your descendants, men and women, there is going to be one that will come and crush the head of the serpent. Such a fantastic verse. It is a promise of a Messiah that is to come. And so when you read Genesis, you're supposed to be saying, okay, well, where is this descendant that is going to crush the head of Satan? And the very next story, Adam and Eve have two kids, Cain and Abel. And Abel, it looks like he's going to be the one that's going to be the promised child that has all these things. But no, Abel's not. He's killed by his brother. Well, then, is Cain going to be the promised child? And no, Cain's not either. Cain's banished and exiled. And then what you have is you have just, they have another child. His name is Seth. And Seth, we're told that Seth is the one that is going to be the line of the promised child. And so you're like, okay, no problem. So as you're reading Genesis, you're trying to find out who the descendants of Seth are, because the descendants of Seth are going to have this promise seed within them. Well, one of the descendants of Seth is a guy named Noah, and there's so much wickedness in the world all around them, and all this crazy stuff's going on in the world around them, that God tells Noah, Noah, I'm going to take you and your family, and I'm going to rescue you guys and the animals and no one else. And you see what God does is he brings this flood to the whole world, and we know the story as Noah's Ark. And Noah has his family there, but immediately after the flood, after the ark hits land, and everyone starts getting back into the kind of going back into the world and going back and doing things in the world and such, we see that there are still problems with humanity. Noah actually has 3 sons. He's got a son named Japheth, Ham, and Shem. And we're asking, like, which kid is the promised kid? Is the promised seed going to come from all the kids or just one of them? But we're told very clearly at the end of Noah's time that Shem, it's the descendants of Shem that are going to be the promised kids. Well, then you say, okay, well, so you follow the descendants of Shem, and this is the reason why there's all these genealogies in the Bible. Well, then you go over and there's another guy. His name is Terah, and Terah has, once again, 3 kids. And Terah has a kid named Haran. He has another kid named Nahor. You never hear about those guys again. Well, I mean, there's some stuff, but you really don't ever hear about those guys again. But he has another kid, a third kid. His name is Abraham, or Abram, at that time. And we are told that Abraham, your kids, you're the one that through you is going to be the seed, the son that will crush the head of Satan. And so we're like, okay, well, we got to follow Abraham's kids. Well, then that goes over to Isaac, and then it goes over to Jacob/Israel. And so here we have Jacob/Israel, and we're asking ourselves the question of, like, which kid is it going to be that's going to get this descendant seed that they're going to pass on to other people? And you would think that Joseph, since he's the hero of this whole story of all these things that happen over here, surely it's going to be him. But God does not choose Joseph. God chooses someone totally different. God chooses Judah. And God says, and we'll see this later on in Genesis, God says to Judah, through you, Judah, you and your descendants, that is where the Messiah, who's going to crush the head of Satan, that is where that is going to come from. And so we kind of get into some family politics for Judah because of that reason. The only reason why we care about Judah and his personal life and all these other various things is because he is a child of promise that is going to have the Messiah come from him. And that's the only reason why we read this story about him, and that's the reason why we have Genesis chapter 38. Moses wants us to know all this information because it's about the Messiah. It's about Jesus. And it's odd when we read this story because we're not going to see Jesus anywhere in the actions of anyone over here. But this is about Jesus, and that's what we see over here. Real quickly, I'm just going to kind of read through the story. I'm going to kind of stop in various places and give commentary as we go, and then I got a few quick points at the end, and then we'll kind of go from there. It says this, in once again, Genesis chapter 38, verse 1 and following. It says, it happened at the time when Judah came down from his brothers and turned to his side to a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. There Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. He took her, went into her, and she conceived and bore a son. And he called his name She conceived again and bore another son, and she called his name Onan. Yet again she bore a son, and she called his name Shelah. Judah was in cherubs when she bore them to him. So here we have a bunch of other stories where people have 3 sons, and 2 of the sons turn out to be kind of no good, or it's not important in the story anymore, and one son becomes the promised son. Here's another story where that's going to be. And you're like, oh, okay, well, let's see what happens over here. Which son, place your bets now, which son's going to be the good son? Here we go. Verse 6, and this is kind of the important part of the story over here. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. See, Judah arranged for his firstborn son to make sure that he had a good wife. Now, this is back in a time of arranged marriages and all this other stuff. And he brought in Tamar. We're not told what nationality Tamar was. That was kind of important in the Old Testament time. In this time over here, it's not important to us today, but it was important at this time over here, and all those various things. And here we have his firstborn son. Is a man now, and it's time for him to get a wife. He gets a wife. Verse 7. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. We're not told what did, and I don't know what did to tick off God in that way. And but is wicked in God's sight, so wicked that God has him killed in some way, shape, or form. We're not told how it is over here, but everyone there sees what happened to was because of. Now, this is important. Whose wickedness? Er's wickedness. It's because of Er's wickedness that he was put to death. And the reason why it's important is Tamar at fault for her husband being evil? It's an important question I think all of us should be able to ask today. Is one person at fault if their spouse does something evil or wicked? Well, obviously, you want to be able to protect your spouse and help your spouse or whatever, but ultimately we can't take full responsibility for what our spouses do. If our spouse, your spouse commits murder or something like that, your spouse is going to have to pay the penalty for said murder and such. So, has passed away. Now, this is where the story sounds bonkers for us in our world today, but at this time, there is no social security. There is no way to be able to protect women who are widows in society. And if you are a woman who does not have children, and Tamar is a woman who does not have children here, if you've been married, it was very hard to get married again. They didn't have lax rules on remarriage like we do today. People didn't kind of see it as, that wasn't part of society or the world then. So because there is no remarriage really in society, if you've been married once and your husband passes away, you are in a really bad spot as a woman. You are kind of destitute in a lot of ways. Sometimes your family, your own family, would reject you because they would blame you for what happened to the husband or something of that nature. And it was a bad spot for widows to be able to be in that situation. So what God does and what society did at that time, and God does talk about this in the book of Deuteronomy, is that if there's another man in line in the family, that other man, and he's not married and he doesn't have children of his own also, he can marry that person to be able to give that person a child. And the purpose was to give that person a child, and so that person could be able to, that person won't be destitute, and that person will be taken care of within the family. So that was the goal for what you're going to hear next over here. Going down over to verse 8 is where we're at. So then Judah said, Onan, the next son, the next one in line, go to your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her, and raise up offspring for your brother. He's saying, hey, I need you to go over to go make a kid, and I want you to raise this kid as your own. I want you to be a father to it, to mentor it, to be a blessing to that child, and you're to do this for one, in honor of your brother, but also it was also for Tamar. It was to protect Tamar, it was to protect the family line, and all these various things. And this was kind of what they kind of did back at that time. I know we don't do this today. I know many of you are very glad we don't do this today, and such. So that was the real result of Judah goes to his son and says, hey, I need you to go in, and I need you to be able to produce a child. That is the goal for you to be able to go and be with Tamar right now. But Onan is not about that. Onan wants to just be able to have his pleasure, but he doesn't want to be able to have his responsibility. And that is what he does over here. It says, verse 9, but Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. So whenever he was in his brother's wife, he would waste the semen on the ground so as to not give an offspring to his brother. So basically Onan would pull out, not to be gross or anything, but he would pull out and make sure that there was no way to impregnate his wife, or no way to impregnate his Tamar, so that he could be able to do that, but he'd still be able to kind of be over there, and he thought that that would be okay. And all he's thinking about is himself. He's like, this kid's not going to grow up and like me. He's going to idolize some dad that he never knew, or my brother doesn't care about Tamar at all. He's being very selfish in this story over here. And so with him doing this and doing all these things over here, God says that that also is very wicked. And we see over in the very next verse, verse 10, and what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. So here we have Judah, and Judah's had 3 sons, and 2 of them have just been wiped out because they've both been selfish and wicked and evil in the sight of God. Judah's got 1 more son. And he starts thinking that it is Tamar's fault for his son's death. And it's not his son's fault. The reason why died was because of Er's wickedness. The reason why Onan died was because of Onan's wickedness, Onan's selfishness, Onan's desire for self-gratification rather than his desire to be able to be responsible and faithful. And it had nothing to do with Tamar. Tamar in this story has not done anything wrong. It's important to be able to point that out. Tamar has not done anything wrong in the story at this point. And so here we have Tamar. She hasn't done anything wrong, and she's going to get blamed for what's happening over here. Because Judah says, verse 10, and this is huge, excuse me, verse 11. Verse 11 says, then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow in your father's house. I don't even want you here anymore. I want you to go to your dad's house. Go live over there, be a widow over there. And then he says, till Salah, my son, grows up. But he feared that he would also die like his brother. So Tamar went and remained in her father's house. At first he uses the excuse of, the other son's a little too young. And he might have been a little too young. But Judah was still supposed to take care of Tamar at this point. He was still supposed to keep her in the household, if you will, and to be able to provide. But he's kicking her out because he sees her as a bad luck charm. He doesn't want her to be around in these various situations. And that's what happens over there. Some time goes by. Verse 12. In the course of time, Judah's wife Shua's daughter died. And when Judah was comforted, he went up to Timian to his sheep shearers, and he and his friends Hira and the Amulite. And when Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going up to Timian and to shear his sheep, we got to stop over here for a second. So Judah goes back to the old place where he met his first wife. His wife passes away, and he mourns the passing of his wife, and there's nothing wrong with that. But he goes over and he wants to see his old buddies from over when he met his first wife. But he's kind of going over, and he's going over to another place. And when Tamar hears, hey, Judah's coming back over here, and we hear in verse 14 that she knows that his son, the third son, is old enough to be able to be married to right now. And Tamar is she's got to put her whole life on Oz. This is a time when women can't work, they can't provide for themselves, and she might be seen as a burden to her own family, and she's definitely seen as a burden to Judah's family. And she's probably feeling pretty horrible in this whole situation. So she comes up with a plan. And this is a really sneaky plan. There's going to be some deception over here. And once again, I don't think God's telling us we need to be able to do these various things, but it's interesting what this plan was. So continuing on, verse 13, when Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going up to Tamar to shear sheep, she took off her widow garment and clothed herself in a veil, wrapping herself up, and she sat at the entrance of Elim, which is the road to Timon. Now I need to stop there for a second there. She takes off her widow's clothes, because she had to wear special clothes as a widow. Takes off her widow's clothes, she covers up her face, and she doesn't say that she's a woman of the night. She doesn't say that she's a prostitute over here, but she dresses like a prostitute, and she goes and sits by the road outside of town, like what prostitutes did back then at that time. And that is, so Tamar goes over and does that. And continuing on, for she saw Sheila, she saw that Sheila is Selah, that's the third son, was grown up, and she had not been given to him in marriage. And so we are told this little bit of information at the end of verse 14, because she, in one way, she's justified in trying to do something to be able to, confront Judah. That would be an appropriate response. I would probably encourage her to confront Judah and talk to him rather than what she does here. But that is she is justified in being able to recognize that she has been wronged in this situation. And he turned to her on the roadside and said, "Come, let me come into you," for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And then she said, "What will you give me that you may come into me?" So he's propositioning her, and then she starts bargaining with him, and he says, "Well, I'll send a young goat from the flock." And she says, "Well," and said to her, "If you give me a pledge until you send it." And he's like, "What pledge shall I give you?" She replied, "Your signet and your cord and your staff that is in your hand." A staff was a walking stick, obviously used around to walk around. It was identifiable in regards to someone. You would use it for protection a little bit, but it was also just it is your car. People know you by your car. Your signet ring, you use dip that into wax, and you use that for signals, for signed documents or something of that nature. And your cord, a cord would be a thing that would be a decorative thing, but you could be able to keep records on it, and they with a cord, they would be able to keep records, records tied up into it, and there was various things that they could be able to do. And so, in one way, she's kind of saying, "Give me your driver's license and your wallet. If you want to be with me, I need your wallet. And then later on, when you give me my goat, I'll give you your wallet back and your car." Pretty steep price over here. Judah could have said no, should have said no, should have not gone up in the first place, but he doesn't do that. Instead, Judah said, and she said, "Give me those things over to him." And then, and so then he gave them to her, and he went with her, and she was conceived by him. And then she arose, and she went away, taking off her veil and putting on the garments of her widowhood. So they go, they're together. But when Judah went over and sent a goat to his friend, the Amorite, to take back for the pledge from the woman's hand, didn't find her. And when he asked the men of the place, "Where is the cult prostitute from the Ephraim from the roadside?" they said, "No cult prostitute has been here." And he returned to Judah, and they said, "I have not found her." And the men of the place said, "There's no cult prostitute is over there." And he said, "Let her keep the things of her own, or we will be laughed at. You see, I sent this young goat, and you did not find her." So Judah's trying to save face over here. He's like, "Man, that's embarrassing." He goes asking around, "Hey, where's the local prostitute?" And there is no local prostitute. And he just assumed that there was one, that she'd be easy to be able to find, and all those other various things. Well, 3 months later go by. And Judah was told, "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Moreover, she's pregnant by immorality." And Judah said, "Bring her to me and let her be burned." So Judah is quick to judge other people. He's quick to judge other people's sin. It's real easy to judge other people's sin. It's real simple to judge other people's sin. It's harder to look in the mirror and to be able to see what's going on inside of your heart. So he hears that his daughter-in-law is pregnant, and she's not supposed to be with anyone at all. It doesn't matter, even she tried to get married with someone else. She's not supposed to be with someone else. She's supposed to marry his son. His son is of age for him to be able to be married to. But Judah's like, no. Well, now we can be rid of her. So he wants her burned in regards to this. Verse 25. And when she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law and said, "The man whom these belong, I am pregnant." And she said, "Please identify who these are, the signet, the cord, and the staff." So she goes over, she hands over all these things. Then Judah identified them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I did not give her my son Selah, and he did not know her again." And so we have the story ends over there. After that, it talks about the kids. The 2 kids are going to be born. There's going to be 2 boys that are born, and they're going to be twins that are born from that union over here. It turns out that Judah's descendant is going to be passed through Tamar from Judah and not his son, because it is these kids that are born through Tamar and Judah and their union over here together. Through those kids, that is where the seed, that is where the promised one who will crush the head of Satan is going to be coming from. The reason why Genesis stops and has all this discussion of all these various things is because later on in the book of Ruth, it goes through all these other various descendants of various people, and it follows along the line, and it talks about Tamar and Judah, and talks about the union between Tamar and Judah and their kids that they have, and those kids over there that they passed it on, and then it passed on to the next generation, and then how it got to Ruth. And Ruth was able to pass it on with her and Boaz, and that's a whole nother story in the book of Ruth over there. And then they have a grandson, and his name's going to be David. David's going to be the greatest king in the Old Testament. And we're told later on that David, you are going to be the one that not only are you the greatest king in the Old Testament, but through your descendants, David, because he's a descendant of Judah, because he's a descendant of Terah, and a descendant of Jacob and Abraham and all these other various people, and Noah and Adam, you are going to be the one that the Messiah is going to be coming through. One second. And when it all comes down over to Jesus, in the beginning of the book of Matthew and the beginning of the book of Luke, there are genealogies, really long genealogies, and both of them mention Judah in them and Tamar. And the reason why they mention Judah and Tamar over there is because they want both sides want you to be able to know, both books want you to know that Jesus is from this line, that Jesus is the one who came to crush the head of Satan. By the way, in the book of Matthew, the genealogy is one way because it's talking about Joseph and Joseph's genealogy and his line. The book of Luke's genealogy is a different way. It branches in some different areas and such because it's talking about Mary. And both Joseph and Mary are descendants of Jesus, or descendants of Judah and Tamar and all these other various things. What's the whole reason for us to be able to look at this over here today? 2 quick points. One is this. When you see all this crazy stuff going on, I just want to remind you that God uses messed up people. Every time we see examples of people talking about who God's going to use for his redemptive purposes, God uses messed up people for his redemptive purposes. Tamar is called righteous in this story. She's the only one called righteous in this story. But she's called righteous in the story, although she is deceptive and she is lying and she's sleeping with people that she shouldn't be sleeping with. But she is the righteous one in this story. There's times when we feel like, when we hear Bible stories or you see other Christians and you see that their lives are so nice and clean and pure or whatever, and you're just like, man, that person they never struggle with any of this stuff. They never have to deal with any of this stuff. And I'm sure most people don't have to deal with this exact story over here that I just read. But we do have to deal with stuff in our lives. And we all have sin in our lives. And we all are working through those sins and all those other various things. And part of the reason why we look at this is because each and every one of us has to be able to acknowledge that God uses imperfect people like Judah and Tamar. God uses imperfect people like you and me. Judah kind of has a change of heart over here. Judah beforehand, he wants to blame other people. He wants to burn her and all sorts of stuff. And you know, he was very critical of Joseph. And we're going to see later on in the Joseph story, Judah has a change of heart. He starts taking responsibility for things that he should be taking responsibility for. Judah kind of grows up. He starts recognizing that that he needs to be getting serious in his life on the things that he needs to be able to do. And so Tamar did not fail in this story, but Judah did. And that is an important thing that we want to be able to acknowledge over here. And there's times when we feel like that, other people aren't failing, but I am. God still uses you. God still wants you to know that you are used by him and that you are blessed by him. And then the final thing, it kind of ties in with all that, is that this is a story, yes, about Judah and Tamar and all these other various things, but it also is a story of grace. Now, yeah, God can use people and everything, but this is how God chose to bring grace into our world. We're told in the book of Romans chapter 5, verse 20. And this is the second half of Romans chapter 5, verse 20. But it's just a short little phrase over here, and it's an important and powerful phrase that I just want to leave you with here in the closing of our time here. When sin increases, grace abounds all the more. When sin is more and more and more, and it's available around, and people see more of it, I want you to know that that is not necessarily that is a bad thing. We want to be able to acknowledge that, and we want to be able to acknowledge that sin is something that's wicked and evil. We don't want to be able to have sin inside of our lives. But when we have a more understanding of sin, when we recognize more and more of sin around us, the more that increases, we want us to be able to know that grace also increases with it. That grace, this is a story of grace. God's grace was available for Judah. Judah does get his life straight before God. I believe that Tamar gets her life straight before God, because she's mentioned in all these various stories of people of faith. Now, so Tamar and Judah are people that are able to experience the grace of God. You and I are also people that can be able to experience the grace of God. And we need to be able to remind ourselves. And when we see sin increasing in the world around us, when we see sin increasing maybe even in our lives, this is more of an opportunity for grace to be able to be powerful in our lives. And we need to be able to turn to the grace of God and seek the salvation that only Jesus is able to provide for us, and the hope that he provides for us. All right. That's all I got for you guys here today. You guys have a great day. Stay cool out there, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye.